Sweet Baby Inc., a topic that prior to making this video I hadn't previously given much thought to, but since it's still getting brought up so much in my comment section, I felt compelled to research the situation to try and learn the truth behind why this brand has left a sour taste in so many consumers' mouths. If you were to believe gaming news sites like Kotaku about recent events that transpired, the Sweet Baby Inc. controversy consists of just a bunch of hostile tinfoil hatters wrongly targeting a tiny, inconsequential, powerless consultancy company, accusing them of forcibly pushing a woke agenda, Kotaku's words, not mine, into game studios. Many gaming news sites were incredibly quick to run to the defense of this outfit, writing one-sided articles framing Sweet Baby Inc. as the victims in this scenario, with concerned gamers being painted as the bad guys. But as we know, real life is never that simple, and looking at sides as heroes and villains is an incredibly childish way to look at the world. So therefore, we know that any of the articles that have been reporting on the situation in this way are incredibly shallow and biased as f***. So with all this said, join me today as we burrow down the Sweet Baby Inc. rabbit hole and do as best a job as I can to find as close to the truth as possible. On the 29th of February 2024, a narrative designer from Sweet Baby Inc. tweeted out a series of posts on X, claiming that the company she worked for was the target of a harassment campaign on Steam known as Sweet Baby Inc. Detected. Heading over to Steam, the page describes itself as a tracker for games involved with Sweet Baby Inc. The overview describes the purpose of this Steam group is to let people know if a game is involved with this company. It provides a curated list of games that Sweet Baby Inc. has worked on, all marked as not recommended. Chris Kindred, the narrative designer I mentioned a moment ago, would accuse the page of existing as a harassment group, complaining to Steam that, even excluding the discriminatory language they use, they would still fail Steam's code of conduct. She would encourage all of her followers to report the group, as well as Cabrutus, the Brazilian user in charge of the page. Others would chime in on this and note that Steam doesn't have guidelines for curators that would prevent someone from starting a curated list that focuses on games worked on by particular entities and making recommendations not to buy games associated with a particular entity. While Kindred would try their best to have this small page cancelled and erased from the internet, instead this very public outburst would end up putting more negative attention on the company she worked for, Sweet Baby Inc., than ever before, with the Steam page itself going from less than 10,000 followers to over 376,000 at the time of writing this video. You know, because going out of your way to cancel people on Twitter is such an effective method to endear yourself to the public and rally people to your cause. Unsurprisingly, these adversarial tweets have functioned as a catalyst to begin a Streisand effect, contributing towards the tidal wave of negativity towards what was previously a fairly unknown entity. But beyond this, what was it about Sweet Baby Inc. that has made such a large pool of people choose to follow Sweet Baby Inc. Detected, the Steam detractor group now monitored by hundreds of thousands more users than before? Well, visiting their website begins to provide us with some of the answers. Sweet Baby Inc. describes itself as a narrative development and consultation studio based in Montreal, a city which seems to keep coming up in these identity politics related videos. They claim to work with others around the globe with a mission to tell better, more empathetic stories while diversifying and enriching the video games industry. They claim to make games more engaging, more fun, meaningful, and more inclusive for everyone. Checking out their services section, they add that they believe gaming needs diverse voices to solve diverse problems. So they provide narrative consultation at any stage of development, boasting a talented team with vetted industry experience to bring stories to life. They assist in 4 key areas: writing, narrative, representation and development, with their outreach program continuously looking to employ new and, in their own words, definitely not mine, marginalised talent, who they believe can change the industry if given the proper support. They boast on this site to have directly worked on a number of huge AAA games, including Alan Wake 2, Spider-Man 2, and God of War Ragnarok. Their list of clients is essentially a who's who of major game publishers in the West and beyond. Exploring the project section of their website, we can even learn what elements of certain games the company worked on. For example, they worked on story consultation, shaping Spider-Man 2, narrative and character consultation with a focus on representation for God of War Ragnarok, and providing script writing for Suicide Squad and more. When we consider that, in many skeptics' minds, they already look at AAA gaming as an industry that places a heavier emphasis on diversity, equity and inclusion than good gameplay and storytelling, it's not surprising that so many gamers, rightly or wrongly, would take issue with the existence of Sweet Baby Inc., particularly when we can identify on their websites that they appear to have had an active role in working specifically on the DEI elements of products, components in video games that many skeptical players believe to be included for the primary purpose of attracting ESG investment. Essentially, heavier environmental, social and governance investing can be easier achieved as many investors tend to gravitate towards companies that demonstrate a commitment to DEI. They believe that DEI creates a positive brand reputation, which can translate into increased market share and investor confidence. Many regulatory bodies are increasingly focused on diversity, equity and inclusion within corporations. Companies that proactively address these issues are better positioned to comply with evolving regulations, reducing the risk of legal and regulatory penalties. Further to this, companies with diverse staff members mitigate risks, such as reputational risks associated with discrimination or exclusionary practices. This can enhance long-term financial performance and protect shareholder value. So, just like most other things that exist in the West, DEI, like everything else, exists mostly as a sort of cash grab above anything else. To show how important this is, there is even an ESG rating system accompanied by scores out of 100 that is viewable online to aid investors in deciding whom to back, with a score of under 50 evidencing a poor investment and a score of over 70 being a good ESG score. Pro-diversity efforts are slated as being one of the factors to increase this score. Basically, the higher the score, the more money you get. Companies often frame DEI as value-driven initiatives, but the cold hard fact is these initiatives are mainly put in place as a risk management factor to ensure they qualify for ESG. Sure, value and finances do feed into each other, but at the end of the day, none of these companies truly care about anything whatsoever other than making as much money as possible. They value diversity and inclusion all the time they see it as profitable. Hence why in games like Spider-Man 2, when it was released in Saudi Arabia, all the pride flags and any references to the LGBT community would be removed. How very stunning, how very brave. If that's not proof that all of this, from a corporate perspective at least, isn't just all about money, then I don't know what else to tell you. However, just because corporations are inserting diversity as a means to fill their coffers doesn't mean that this diversity is inherently bad. After all, it's not so much that people have a problem with diversity in games, though obviously there are always exceptions to the rules, like trolls for example. It's the way the diversity comes across as forced and disingenuous pandering by corporate entities who do not genuinely care and are more motivated by greed than apparent ideals. Who else can remember Finn being removed from the Star Wars posters in China? So therefore, Sweet Baby Inc. seems to only exist due to this corporate investment demand and has thus manifested to feed the corporate machine's desires to look like they actually have ethics and pretend they care about things other than money. Even though it's extremely transparent, that's not truly the case. The truth is that Sweet Baby Inc. has seen a gap in the markets they could fill and make a lot of money themselves doing so, whilst getting to preach their ideals to the masses from behind the curtains. However, by drawing attention to themselves on Twitter by kicking off about a relatively inconsequential and small Steam page, they have alerted the larger community to themselves that wasn't aware of them prior to all of this. And to compound matters further, it was done in an unprofessional and petty manner, a perfect example of the Streisand effect and why Sweet Baby Inc.'s very existence irks people. But to make the Streisand effect all the more effective, game journalists all over the show have been publishing articles about Sweet Baby Inc., writing about them favourably while simultaneously attacking gamers as a whole. That's a recipe for disaster, and there's no way that the Sweet Baby Inc. Detected page would have managed to gain that kind of following if it were not for journalists spotlighting this controversy and attempting to gaslight the public yet again. No journalist seems to have done a better job of drumming up support for the Sweet Baby Inc. detraction movement than Alyssa McCanty, the senior editor of Kotaku, who has posted a curated version of events of what has transpired recently. In an insane move which was sure to pour fuel on the fire, this journalist linked the entire movement against Sweet Baby Inc. to old forgotten forum posts on Kiwi Farms, a forum that has garnered a reputation online for organising coordinated trolling and harassment campaigns. Now, I am not saying that the notorious forum didn't have anything to do with the initial heat that Sweet Baby Inc. was feeling before the infamous tweets. However, drawing attention to the platform, the ongoing controversy, while essentially going on to tar all detractors with the same brush, is certainly not an effective way to prevent any trolling Sweet Baby Inc. employees may be experiencing. Let's be honest. All Kotaku really wants is those maximum outrage clicks, and they couldn't really care about the subjects of their articles' well-beings. This is why Kotaku seems happy to both feed the trolls as well as publish ridiculously biased articles like the one we are about to discuss now. Referring to Sweet Baby Inc. detractors as misinformed while completely ignoring everything the company has written about themselves on their own website, she refers to the people who have voiced their distaste for the outfit as bad actors. McCanty goes on to insinuate that anyone who has a problem with the company is basically a crazy conspiracy theorist. Infiltrating a Sweet Baby Inc. detraction Discord server, she highlights a DM conversation she had with one of its users, who informed her that in his opinion, Sweet Baby Inc. is a symptom of other ideological worldviews that they believe to have taken hold of the Western world, media and gaming as a whole, which, to be fair, in my opinion and many others too, is more or less correct. She would then attempt to slam dunk this user by writing that this person stated Sweet Baby Inc. add race and identity group quotas to everything they are involved with, and then gloated that it didn't provide any evidence of this. Whilst this last part about identity group quotas is certainly a misconception, this doesn't mean that the company doesn't try to take control of these facets of video games via other means. At the Game Developers Conference, Kim Belair, the Sweet Baby Inc. co-founder, would state that if you're creatively engaged in AAA work, a field I've been deeply involved in for many years, advocating for important initiatives to your higher-ups is crucial. Should they fail to recognise the value in your proposals, such as the need for consultants or research, consider a direct approach with your marketing team. Paint a vivid picture of the potential consequences if your requests are ignored, emphasising the necessity of fulfilling them. Basically, she's saying if those who work above you do not agree or want to pay for your input, then the method you should implement is to intimidate them by presenting worst case scenarios in order to draw that sweet ESG money out of them. By the way, did I mention that Kim Belair has a degree in marketing? So therefore, I feel she has a greater understanding of what to say to scare people into going in what she considers the right direction. So basically, the direction she can profit from. Building on this, she states, for studios assembling teams, prioritise hiring diverse creators and ensure they're compensated fairly. Diversify not only in creative roles, but across the entire team to combat unconscious biases. It's statements like this that really rub Joe Public the wrong way. While diversity is important and no one is arguing that, it shouldn't overshadow meritocracy. Hiring decisions should be primarily based on talent, skills and qualifications rather than quotas or political correctness. Emphasising diversity for the sake of diversity can lead to overlooking more qualified individuals, ultimately compromising the quality of the team and the work produced. At the same conference, in a strange sequence of events, she compares the average consumer to babies, commenting that despite the evolving landscape of audiences and events, the focus remains predominantly on catering to white, cisgender, heterosexual males. This catering isn't just about offering content for enjoyment, but resembles feeding a picky baby, repeatedly offering what is known to be liked without much variation. This approach has ingrained itself so deeply that it's created a culture afraid of deviating from the norm, for fear of upsetting this picky demographic. Firstly, this is a massive and incredibly condescending false equivalence to draw. You can't compare fully grown people to fussy toddlers who don't want to try eating a carrot. It's completely ludicrous. It's a dismissive and simplistic way of looking at consumers. She seems to think that she knows what's best for them. I can understand that she feels like certain demographics are adverse to change after having a lifetime of apparently being the only people represented, but there has to be a better way of explaining this and comparing people to babies. It's one of those statements that says more about the person saying it than whom they're talking about, as she's projecting how she sees the world. She then goes on to add, the discussion shouldn't be confined to advocacy circles, but should permeate every aspect of the industry, from narrative development to marketing strategies. By integrating these discussions into the fabric of game development, there's a greater chance of effecting meaningful change. Ultimately, the challenge lies in finding ways to amplify these conversations beyond the confines of industry events and advocacy groups, ensuring they become parts of a mainstream discourse. Everything she has just said here directly contradicts what was stated by Alyssa McEntee in her hit piece about the Sweet Baby Inc. detractors. I mean, for crying out loud, one of her subheadings is Sweet Baby Inc. isn't forcing diversity, it's happening naturally, yet I've just shown you direct quotes showing the opposite to be true. She also tried to claim that they are not a DEI consultancy firm, despite the fact that it literally says on their website that they are a consultancy studio diversifying and enriching the video game industry to make it inclusive for everyone. They even have an outreach program specifically looking to employ marginalised talent. Somehow she just runs with the idea that Sweet Baby Inc. are simply a narrative design company, completely ignoring everything else that's mentioned in the company's self-description about what they do on their own website. What is even the purpose of an article like this? Do they not realise that people will just look up this information? I mean, she's actually fully spreading misinformation in this article, and for what purpose? Oh, and if you check out her related TikTok for this article, she calls everyone who disagrees racist, while simultaneously coming across as a caricature of a stereotypical leftist. It's to such a degree, though, that I'm not really sure if this is a comedy gimmick, kind of like a pro wrestler or maybe even Borat, or whether she is off the rails like this in real life too. It's as though she's decided on a conclusion before writing the rest of the article, and be damned any contradicting evidence that would mean changing this conclusion. I also want to add that on the occasions where she directly quotes Kim Belair in this article, there are multiple ellipses which indicate missing dialogue. Now, this could just be irrelevant information cut out, or it could be information that doesn't suit the narrative of the article. After all, Alyssa seems to write in an intellectually dishonest manner that seems designed to mislead her audience purposely in an attempt to showcase her curated narrative as fact. So here's a prime example. In her article, she claimed, the team worked on Suicide Squad long after the story was written, and even then they joined just to write in-game ads, audio logs and NPC barks, CEO Kim Belair tells me over video call. Yet if you look at what Sweet Baby Inc. claim on their own website, they worked on script writing, including banter, cutscene sparks, audio logs, etc. She's so determined to win this argument that she's cutting out the valuable details to make a point she doesn't even have. This is the person in charge behaving like this. These journos seem to feel about gamers the same way J.J. Jameson feels about Spider-Man. Those gamers are a menace to society. Despite mainly focusing on narrative development, even in the call between Kim Belair and Alyssa McCanty, she mentions that they do offer cultural consultations or authenticity consultations. Belair states, "We might be asked to look at a story if there's a character in it who is marginalised in a certain way, and the studio wants us to connect them with a consultant who can bring a little bit of authenticity." Personally, I think most people won't have a problem with that. I certainly don't, provided it makes sense to the story and doesn't feel forced or like inclusion for the sake of inclusion. For the record, none of this is anything remotely new. I can give you an example of this as far back as 1993. My husband, Top Hat Gaming Man, once interviewed James Goddard for his YouTube channel when he made a video about T-Hawk. James Goddard worked on many of the classic iterations of Street Fighter 2 and, relevant to today's video, he set up the Capcom US Research and Development Support Team, which handled localization, testing and feedback. He helped with adjustments and the characters' names. He also did very early work in cultural awareness to make characters better represented in the likes of Street Fighter and Slam Masters. He tells my husband an anecdote specific to the character T-Hawk, where he had pulled in a colleague, Steve Patton, who had Native American family members to ensure that the character of T-Hawk was appropriate for mass consumption, as well as being sensitive to the Native American culture and population. Steve Patton is a long-forgotten pioneer of this kind of practice. However, the big difference here is there was no grandstanding at the time from Capcom or anyone else involved. It was a due diligence process, which just made sense. Common sense, in fact, which is all anyone wants. There were no third-party consultancy firms profiteering from it or video games implementing diversity for the sake of diversity. Back then, on the whole, characters had a purpose beyond this, which is why no one was upset by it. As one of the first people to technically consult on diversity in a video game, when questioned about whether diversity has improved in video games today, he stated, "It's been a slow uphill road, but yes." Sadly, that was not always the case though, especially going back to the earliest days of video games, i.e. Oregon Trail. However, I think it was around 2000 or so when some game developers finally started to make more positive steps as to how they represented Native Americans in their games. A personal favourite being the original Prey, which came out in 2006, a game still in my collection to this day. They not only centered the story on a well-written character, Tommy Tawodi, but the voice actor Michael Greyeyes was also Native American and had a fair bit of creative input on the game's development as well. I just want to re-emphasise that Prey came out in 2006. This is 18 years ago. T-Hawk is 31 years old, so this has been going on for years before the modern identity politics movement had begun, and in an era before there were so many companies like Sweets Baby Inc. who acted like they came up with the concept of inclusion. Sweets Baby Inc. and their contemporaries, accompanied by journalists who report on them in a virtuous manner, act like they invented the wheel, and act like there were no games that weren't centered around straight white males. No one minds diversity, people only take issue when it doesn't make sense. For example, when characters appear in environments that do not suit them, much like God of War Ragnarok, which Sweets Baby Inc. worked on, steeped in a Norse mythological aesthetic located within the coldest parts of Northern Europe. The game's immersion is broken for many due to the inclusion of black characters with designs you wouldn't associate with Norse mythology. Having that feeling when playing a game isn't racist, and it isn't nasty. It's just an observation you've had. You wouldn't place me in there, I wouldn't fit in either, and funnily enough, I actually have Viking heritage amongst my tapestry of genetics. This is diversity for the sake of diversity. It's the equivalent of having one of Black Panther's closest advisors in Wakanda being the Welshman Dafydd from Aberystwyth, complete with a herd of sheep. By the way, I'm allowed to say that my grandmother is Welsh. But Dafydd being there wouldn't make sense, and no one would want or ask for that. Not even the Welsh. Anyway, Dafydd. There would be very little in the form of complaints about diversity and inclusion if Hollywood and the gaming industry laid off all of the race and gender swapping and instead focused on creating new diverse characters and stories with their own diverse worlds and lore, rather than taking existing ones with established fan bases with certain expectations and then expecting people to accept the changes without questioning it. It doesn't matter what it is. If you change something people like, those people will moan. Even on this channel recently, a few members of my audience have moaned at me for not making solely retro gaming content. Back to the Kotaku article and the phone conversation with the Sweet Baby Inc. higher-ups. Kim Belair goes on to say, the assumption that team members at Sweet Baby Inc. or any marginalised person for that matter can only offer up content that is based on their identity is incredibly frustrating for the team and for marginalised industry members at large. People can't imagine that we might do anything else but DEI, Belair says. They can't imagine that we're just talented writers, that we're talented narrative designers, and that people are hiring us because we tell good stories, because we collaborate well, and because we write video games. They have to diminish our accomplishments to our identities. They can't imagine that the work I did on Spider-Man was story work versus adding pride flags, you know? This is gaslighting and blaming the people's poor perception of them by alluding to prejudice. They blame the public for diminishing what they do when all the public have to go off is what they themselves put out there. If Sweet Baby Inc. don't want people to have this kind of impression, then how about they don't stand up at the Game Developers Conference for 30 minutes talking about DEI and don't dedicate their entire website and digital footprint promoting the importance of hiring them as a consultancy firm for the very purposes of creating empathetic stories while diversifying and enriching the video game industry and making games more inclusive for everyone. They can't have it both ways. Considering Kim Belair has a marketing degree, you'd think they'd have a better idea about how to market their public image. At the close of the call with Alyssa McCanty, Kim Belair hilariously adds, if you're going to come for my work, you can do that. If someone says I wrote a story and you say it's not good, that's totally fine. But if you're going to come for me, at least come correct. Don't be loud and wrong. There's an irony in there somewhere. But to give what they said some level of credence, anyone out there who is spouting that Sweet Baby Inc. are an entity directly controlling gaming and its stories are fundamentally incorrect. However, where the detractors are correct is that Sweet Baby Inc. do indeed have a level of influence and certainly primarily exist based on the way they promote themselves on their website as a company designed to profit off of the DEI movement and get their hands on that sweet ESG money. As mentioned earlier in the video, Belair even explains methods in her GDC speech about how to manipulate companies and get them to play ball and make them feel intimidated in order to take a lack of DEI as a serious threat to the organisation. It's worth noting that this rhetoric was coming out of her mouth 2 years ago, a long time before the backlash and her attempts to retcon the narrative through platforms like Kotaku, who are happy to assist in repainting the picture. Let me reiterate, diversity and inclusion in video games is a good thing, an excellent thing in fact, providing it makes narrative sense. However, all the time there is such an abundance of these consultancy companies who, by the way, are a symptom of the much larger ESG problem we mentioned earlier. They will always be, of course, like anyone else, constantly trying to justify their existence and pitching their importance for the same reason as everyone else, to make as much money as possible. That's all this is, it's all about money. As for Alyssa McCanty, in her final paragraph of her hit piece against gamers, she refers back to her Discord conversation with a Sweet Baby Inc. detractor. She states, After chatting with Sweets Baby Inc., I returned to my Discord DM with one of the members of the group rallying against them. With the help of Belair's own words, I explained what SBI actually does, its core focus on narrative work, and how DEI is only a small part of their remit. He wouldn't budge. With all due respect, it really just seems like the same thing to me, just a bit more hands-on in the writing process. The end goal is to insert DEI type stuff into the project they are working on. Well, yeah. You don't need to listen to me anymore. Just go and watch the Belair GDC panel and check out their website to make up your own mind. You're not a big fat baby after all. Well, this was a long ass video, so I would like to offer you a further reward for your patience. I have access to thousands of games that are up to 90% cheaper than on Steam. Use my affiliate link in the pinned comments and grab a bargain and support this show simultaneously. Happy shopping.